2024 was a pretty big year for me games-wise. For one, I got my first beefy PC in January, which opened up endless possibilities for what I could play. Later on, I got a Steam Deck, which has really changed how I play and buy video games. In terms of the games released this year, they interested me a fair bit, and even though it was a relatively slow year overall, I still had a lot of fun with what I played. I also saw some amazing traction on my channel in 2024. Never in a million years would I have guessed that a small 3DS modding video I made would get over 500,000 views and thousands of subscribers, but here we are. So I just wanted to take some time to talk about what I spent my year doing in terms of the games I played and discuss my feelings on them. I'm not going to go super in-depth on everything I played, but I am going to do my best to explain my overall thoughts. Also, keep in mind that not every game on this list actually released in 2024, rather the list consists of games I played for the first time in 2024. So without further ado, let's get into every game I played in 2024, ranked.
Green Hill's looking a lot more like Sand Hill right now.
Sonic Forces. I don't even know why I did this to myself. Years ago, I got Sonic Forces on Switch digitally for like $10 on sale and never actually got around to playing it. Randomly this year, for basically no reason, I decided to boot the game up and finally give it a shot. I had heard so many bad things over the years, so I wasn't expecting much, but honestly, yeah, it was pretty bad. But strangely enough, I didn't entirely hate it. I ended up beating the full game and even spent an hour or so going back to get some collectibles I missed before realizing, wait, I don't hate myself actually, so I put the game down. The story sucks, the game is painfully short, playing as classic Sonic makes me feel like I'm playing with butter in my hands, the game practically plays itself at certain points, and the reusing of old stage themes for the 40 millionth time makes me feel like I'm in Groundhog Day. But despite it all, I kinda had fun. I think the character customization is cool, some of the levels can be moderately enjoyable, and I think there were a lot of ideas here that could have been great if they were executed correctly and fully fleshed out. I think the original characters' stages are unique and fun sometimes, but it doesn't really get there. Even the music is kind of a mixed bag, which is crazy to be saying about a Sonic game. The EDM dubstep style they use for a lot of the tracks is mediocre at best and jarring at worst, especially with classic Sonic stages. But then you have Fist Bump, which is one of my favorite songs in the entirety of the Sonic franchise. This is the only game on this list I would consider to be genuinely bad with very few redeeming qualities. It's such a disappointing entry where nothing feels fleshed out in the slightest, which makes sense when you consider that this game only had a bit over a year in full development. Say what you will about games like Sonic 06, Sonic Boom, or even Shadow the Hedgehog, but at least they were trying to do something. This game feels like an English essay you would write the night before it's due. And you still only submitted half of the required word count.
I cannot wholeheartedly recommend this game to anyone in a sane state of mind,
but there is some fun to be had here in a turn your brain off kind of way. If you're gonna get the game though, at least find it for dirt cheap, please.
Welcome to the casino, bitches!
Okay, maybe I was lying about the whole every game on this list isn't inherently bad thing. Atlus had an amazing 2024 with so many big releases both developed and published by them. This isn't one of them. Many might not even know of this game because it wasn't released outside of China, Korea, or Taiwan when it launched. However, with an easy-to-install translation patch, you can play the game sorta in English. At first, the idea of a Persona gacha game intrigued me because I'd never really gotten invested in a game like this before. However, this game falls into the same manipulative pitfalls that all gacha games employ. It got me invested for like 2 months, but eventually it led to me dropping the game. The pull rates are horrendous, even just getting through the story is extremely grindy after the first palace, and so many of Persona's systems have been dumbed down in favor for a video game casino! Woohoo! Granted, some of the elements of Persona remain intact and are used in new creative ways to fit a game like this, such as the free time events. The music is also pretty good, and the fact that this game will eventually turn into a big Persona SMT crossover is cool. But when I eventually dropped the game because it felt like a chore and not a game anymore, I had no desire to return. If you like this kind of game, it isn't bad by any means, but it just isn't for me. I'd rather spend all the hours grinding required to progress playing games that aren't designed to waste my time and money. If this wasn't a Persona game, it would most definitely be at the bottom of the list, but I guess that just makes me part of the problem, huh? Princess Peach Showtime. This might be the most boring video game I've ever played, which you wouldn't think would be the case just by looking at it. There's a unique stage play aesthetic, many different gameplay styles brought on by the creative costumes, and pretty good music. This game should be fun, but it requires so little engagement from the player that it becomes unbearably boring after like 20 minutes of playing. I don't even know how I was able to push through the whole thing, but somehow I did. This game is clearly made for very small children, as they are the only people I could fathom finding any form of difficulty from this game. However, multiple portions of this game require the player to read to figure out how to progress, with no voice acting, by the way, so who is this game for? A lot of people use the fact that this game is made for kids to shield it from any form of criticism. Of course you're not gonna like it, you're not the target audience, but that isn't usually how Nintendo rolls with these kinds of games. They're known for games that anyone can enjoy and usually have easy modes for kids who may have trouble with the harder levels. So when Nintendo has set a precedent that their games are made for kids and adults to enjoy, of course I'm gonna be caught off guard when I play this game and it feels like it was developed by Fisher-Price and not the people who made— oh wait, Goodfield made Yoshi's Crafted World? Yeah, that makes sense. You know, they really should just rename this company to Melatonin. After all, their games do have the same effect as the drug. It just sucks that a Princess Peach game had to be the one to suffer from this. I want to see Peach star in more games, but if they're just gonna use her to make the babiest of baby games, maybe the series should just stay dormant. I'm sorry.
Man, I spent hours of my life stomping Koopas.
The Mario vs. Donkey Kong series has never been a huge success both critically and commercially, but it's a decently fun time. Unfortunately, this game is very mediocre. However, I think as a remake, this game does a pretty good job. Some of the puzzles here can get pretty difficult, and there was a lot of content added here. 2 completely new worlds with plus versions of all the worlds, and a time attack mode for all 130 levels make this a pretty substantial remake, visuals aside. And those completely remade assets and visuals look great as well. The art style and colors pop to make this one of the best looking games on the console. So why is this game so low on the list then? From everything I've said, this sounds like a great time. I mean, I guess it is, if it's your thing. For me, the game felt very repetitive even just by the end of the main story. I haven't tackled the expert stages plus worlds or time attacks because by the end of World 8, I was kinda ready to be done. I appreciate all the new content that was added. I'm not trying to say it shouldn't be here. I just think the game gets stale fairly quickly, and the new mechanics they introduce are fun at first, but quickly lose their luster. Maybe this game just isn't for me, and I think that's okay. I understand those who like this game because there is a lot of content for what it is, but it just didn't fully click with me. I'm glad I tried the game out, I just don't plan on coming back to it anytime soon.
And Chica? Well, you just be Chica.
This year, I started a Five Nights at Freddy's binge, wanting to eventually make a video covering all of the games since I'd never played them before. However, I ended up dropping the project and only played the first 4 games. While I would like to eventually make a series retrospective like I was planning to do, I don't see it happening anytime soon, so I figured I'd at least talk about the games I played here in this ranking. The reason why I put them all together for one entry is that they would all be directly next to each other if I ranked them individually. There are many gameplay differences between the games, but they're all very similar, so I just put them in one entry. And yeah, gameplay-wise, they're pretty fun. It's enjoyable to figure out the strategies for dealing with each animatronic, which adds to the replayability of the series as well. However, a lot of what happens each night is decided solely by luck, which can be very annoying. FNAF 1 was simple arcadey fun and created the mascot horror genre. It started the expansive lore of the series, but it was a fun game first and foremost, which I like. FNAF 2 expanded on that concept, but I think it also overcomplicated things and lost a lot of the original's magic. I think it just has way too many animatronics and too many of them function very similarly. FNAF 3 is my favorite simply because it's so satisfying to use the audio lures to keep Springtrap in one place. While it may be the easiest of the 4, I like how you can play a more offensive role against the animatronics instead of just defending yourself until the end of the night. Plus, getting the true ending is fun, and I think it served as a good conclusion to the story before they made like 20 more games. And finally, FNAF 4 goes back to the roots of the series by literally having the same layout as the first game, but also adding a lot more. This is easily the scariest game too, as the animatronics have horrifying designs and you have to listen to everything that's going on, which creates such a tense atmosphere. My ranking for each game individually would be that FNAF 3 is the best, then FNAF 4, then FNAF 1, and finally FNAF 2 as the worst. These games are pretty fun, but I think a lot of my enjoyment of the series comes from the lore, which is barely told in the games themselves, especially with the first few.
Say, fellas, did somebody mention the door to darkness?
Indigo Park is peak mascot horror, but it still has some work to do. The game has such an interesting concept and subverts many annoying aspects of modern mascot horror, while also staying familiar. The Disney World parody works really well to enhance the atmosphere, and the mystery behind it all is genuinely interesting to theorize about. The only reason why I have this game ranked so low is because Chapter 1 is painfully short with little actual gameplay. You can beat it in about an hour, and the opening is extremely linear with very few jump scares to be had. However, this concept alone warrants expansion, and I can't wait to see what they cook up for Chapter 2. Plus, Chapter 1 is completely free on Steam, so there's no reason to not try it out. Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble is certainly a game where a monkey is in a ball and you collect bananas and you rumble. It's fine. The story mode levels are fine, the minigames are fine, and the new designs of the characters are fine. The added mechanics are pretty fun and make this game stand out among others in the series, but I don't know, the game still doesn't grab me that much. None of the recent games have been that great for me, which makes me wonder if I even like the series at all at this point. But Super Monkey Ball 2 is one of my favorite GameCube games, so I don't know. This game doesn't do anything bad, but I didn't find myself interested in the same way, even though it's similar to the originals in a lot of ways. I'll probably still try out new entries in this series as it continues, but right now, Monkey Ball stands as an enigma in my gaming repertoire. If you like modern Monkey Ball, you're going to like this one. In fact, I'd say it's the best game in the series we've gotten in a while. However, I thought it was just okay, which is why it's so low on the list. Little Kitty Big City is a fun little puzzle platformer where you are indeed a little kitty in a big city. The game is charming, the puzzles are fun, the writing is witty, and look, you play as a cute little cat, what more could you want? The game is also only 2 hours. The hour count price point debate is a topic for another video, but yeah, this game is really short. I liked what I played, but there isn't that much to it, and it wasn't super memorable. Out of all the games that released this year, heck, out of all the indie games that released this year, it's hard to recommend this one because there's not that much content to it. And I feel bad saying all this because it's clear that there was a lot of love poured into this game, and I hate to rank such a charming indie so low. But I can't in good conscience say that this game is better than a lot of the other stuff on this list. However, if the game seems like your thing, definitely give it a look. Don't let this lower ranking deter you from such a heartwarming game.
Smash that like button.
Content Warning is a game where you jump into scary worlds to make funny videos for your YouTube channel. I don't remember if it's actually called YouTube. It's probably not. I didn't feel like looking it up. You have to survive while also making sure you get footage of the monsters doing monster stuff. The game is clearly inspired by Lethal Company, a game that, spoiler alert, is higher on the list. I think the new things Content Warning does are very creative, but it also feels derivative in many ways. It managed to stand out enough to grab mine and many others' attention, but it didn't keep me interested in the same way that Lethal Company did a few months prior. I think if I gave the game another chance, I would like it a lot more, but as it stands, I would rather just play Lethal Company if I'm in the mood for this kind of game. However, if you get bored of Lethal Company and are looking for a similar game, Content Warning is an easy recommendation from me.
If you really don't know about donuts, how come you don't go nuts?
I played Monster Hunter Stories 2 when it came out a few years back and had a lot of fun with it. It wasn't one of the best RPGs I've played, but it had a lot of cool ideas that gave Pokemon a run for its money and was surprisingly deep with its mechanics. So when I saw the original game was getting a remaster on modern platforms, I was excited to see where the series started. And it certainly started as a 3DS game. The game is fun enough, and it has a lot of the same mechanics as the sequel, but it just didn't grab me in the same way, and I think a lot of that has to do with the presentation. The visuals haven't really been improved all that much, which makes it feel kinda weird to play on a bigger screen. The addition of voice acting is nice, but the story wasn't as captivating as the second game for me, which again I think has to do with the presentation, as this game is a lot less cinematic. The game is good and it has the same DNA as the sequel, so I had fun playing, but I think the second game improves on it in almost every way, so honestly I'd say just play that one. There are some references to the original in the second game's story, but it's not really enough to affect it that much, so yeah, I'd say just play that one if you're interested. However, if you already played Monster Hunter Stories 2, or you're just looking for more monster collecting games, you're sure to like this one.
Zeus, give me the 80s-est, crowd-pleasingest, rock-balladiest song you got!
This game was such a weird release from Nintendo this year. Nintendo World Championships NES Edition provides loads of challenges based on 13 NES games. This game could be considered a spiritual successor to NES Remix on the 3DS and Wii U, but it doesn't really change much about the games themselves and has a much greater emphasis on speedrunning. You do little bite-sized challenges and get ranks on each depending on your time, and it can be really fun to go for the S ranks. They do a lot of creative things with it, and the games they have on offer are a pretty good bunch. There's not any stinkers here. Pretty much all of the Nintendo-developed NES games are available, which is super nice. The 80s aesthetic is also really cool, and the manual-like guides for the longer stages are a neat touch. The game doesn't do anything crazy, and honestly, it's not super memorable, but I had a fun time with it, and I would love to see them do something similar for Nintendo's other systems. Just imagine a World Championships SNES edition, or N64 edition. There's so many possibilities they can do here, but based on what happened with NES Remix, I'm not entirely sure if they will. Regardless, I think this game is really fun, and if you're a fan of retro titles, this is right up your alley. Plus, the collector's edition of this game is really cool, and yeah, of course I bought it. What do you take me for, someone who makes wise financial decisions?
You've killed me!
Good.
This is probably my hottest take of the video. I'm not the biggest fan of Echoes of Wisdom, and it's such a shame because I really wanted to like this game. I even made a whole video on why I was excited about it, which I never really do for individual games. The idea of having the freedom of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in a 2D Zelda game sounded so exciting to me, but that's not really what this game is. For one, the game isn't even really open world. You can go almost anywhere on the map from the get-go, but there's a relatively linear way you need to progress through the story and do the dungeons. A story that is honestly not that interesting after the opening, by the way. Honestly, I'd say the 3DS game, A Link Between Worlds, is more open than this one in a lot of ways. Echoes let you make copies of objects or enemies to get around the world and do combat encounters, and when I first saw this, I thought this was a genius idea. But honestly, they get very clunky to use, and a lot of them can straight up just break the game, like the water blocks. I think the limitations that come with a 2D space make it a lot easier to do stuff like that with these mechanics. Combat is also atrocious, as you have no control over the enemies you spawn, and trying to use other echoes to defeat enemies is extremely cumbersome. For many encounters, I honestly just found myself wishing I had a sword. Oh wait, there is a sword that you can get in the game by transforming into a copy of Link, where the game plays like any other Zelda game. But because the developers don't want players to just be Link the entire time, they put a cooldown on it. If you have to implement a cooldown on a mechanic so that players don't use it too much, not because it's overpowered, but because it simply makes the game more fun and less annoying, that is just flawed game design. The game is this high on the list because I think Zelda having her own game is awesome, and the first few hours were genuinely super fun. My bashing towards this game comes from a place of love and not hate, because I want to see them improve on it. But the Echoes mechanic gets annoying and stale really fast to where by the end of the game, I was so ready to be done. I think if this game was half the runtime, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, but as it stands, it feels pretty bloated in several areas and isn't a game I would see myself coming back to anytime soon, even if there are some things I like about it. Oh, Palworld, how I love and loathe you. I feel like a lot of people were interested in this game just on the pitch that it's Pokemon with guns. You don't even unlock guns until like 20 hours in. When this game launched, I had a lot of respect for it and I thought it was pretty fun. Many instantly wrote it off as just a Pokemon ripoff because it had some similar gameplay mechanics and familiar designs for its pals. But it also does many new things, and the game definitely has its own identity. In a time where Pokemon has been stagnant and boring, seeing an indie game take many concepts from Pokemon and do cool new things with them was impressive, and the success of the game showed that Pokemon needed to step their game up. But once that initial rush of, oh my goodness, Pokemon with guns wore off, it left a kind of game for me, to be honest. Despite not unlocking guns, I still had a lot of fun with the first few hours of the game, and I saw myself getting addicted to this game in the same way as something like Minecraft. And then I hit mid-game. Sure, at this point you start unlocking some guns, which is cool, but the game itself also gets really grindy. Because there's not a set path or story to go down, the monster collecting aspect of the game takes a backseat most of the time in favor of the survival gameplay. And as someone who isn't really a huge fan of survival games other than Minecraft, that made me eventually put it down. I even picked the game back up again recently to play with friends, but since the map is the same thing every time you start a new world, it didn't feel all that different to me. I know you can spawn at a different area every time you start a new game, but the survival gameplay is still pretty much the same every time with not much creativity. Surprisingly, I found the game not super fun to replay even though it's been almost a year since I first got it. Maybe it just needs more time. I'll probably come back to it later when they've released a few more updates, but right now, I'm not super interested in jumping back in. If you haven't played Palworld yet and you think the game will interest you, it probably will because it genuinely is really fun. I think I just got tired of it. But also, if you're like me and you went into this game looking for a fun monster collecting experience first, you might be a bit disappointed. I've never been a huge fan of the Luigi's Mansion series, but I do have a strong appreciation for it. Luigi's Mansion 2 may be my least favorite, but it's still a great game. The main thing people dislike about this game is the mission structure, which I understand the complaints about, but it never bothered me all that much. The only annoying part about it is that there are certain parts of the mansion you just can't explore until later missions, which really discourages exploration. But once you get used to the structure, it gets a lot better and much more fun. The puzzles in this game are also very creative, and I found many new mechanics introduced to be a blast. I still think Luigi's Mansion 3 is better though because it combines both the styles of the first game and the second game in a creative way. All in all, this is a quality game that didn't drag on for longer than it needed to. However, most of my issues with this game have to do with the remake portion of it, or rather remaster I should say. For one, the game just doesn't look that great. You can tell it was just an up-resed 3DS game with some effort being put into the visuals, but not enough. The textures look very blocky and the lighting is just ugly in certain areas. I feel the same way about the upcoming Donkey Kong Country Returns remaster, which suffers from a lot of the same issues. This kind of thing wouldn't normally bother me that much, but the game is $60 and doesn't add much other than just being on the Switch. So when the original launched at $40 over 10 years ago, I'm gonna expect a bit more than this. They can't even use the excuse that it was a 3DS game to begin with, so it's hard to make the visuals look modern without fully remaking it, because Miitopia on Switch exists. That game looks great on the console because they put the effort in. Other than looking better, it also had a lot more content added, and it was only $50. Despite all this though, the game is still fun, which is all that really matters at the end of the day. If you're a fan of Luigi's Mansion, you definitely should try it out. But if you haven't played the series before, I would just go with the third game.
Game Village is incompatible with order.
Dude, I don't mean to disappoint you, but you do realize me and Marina are a gay couple, right?
What? No.
Outside of very small mentions here and there, I don't think I've ever talked about Splatoon on the channel, which is unfortunate because I'm a huge fan of the series. It's one of my favorites. However, I experienced this cycle where I get really into the game for a few months and then put it down for a while, but I always seem to come back. One of the things that brought me back earlier this year was the new Side Order DLC. Now, I know this isn't a new game I played this year and is simply an expansion, but if the Game Awards can nominate Elden Ring DLC for Game of the Year, I can talk about the funny Squid Game. Splatoon has had some pretty good campaigns and some pretty mid campaigns over the years, and I think Side Order falls squarely in the middle. I think the concept is an amazing idea and should have easily been the best Splatoon campaign on the concept alone if they went all the way with it. Side Order is a roguelite where you climb a tower and get upgrades and power-ups along the way to help you climb. When you die, you keep some of your items, allowing you to buy permanent upgrades to make the next run easier. This concept is really fun until you realize that the tower is really short and most of the content in Side Order comes from beating it multiple times with each weapon to get the true ending, which isn't even anything crazy. Replaying the game over and over again isn't uncommon for roguelites, but most of them also take a while to beat initially and provide a lot of extra stuff on each new run. At least from what I've heard, I haven't actually played a ton of these games. The story is also very cool in concept, but the game unfortunately doesn't do a lot with it. The DLC is good for what it is, and I would 100% recommend it to any Splatoon fan, but I also hope they expand on this concept in later games because a Splatoon roguelike is an amazing idea that I would love to see fleshed out a bit more. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Splatoon 4 or whatever the next game is uses this concept and takes it to the next level. I'm not the biggest fan of cozy games other than Animal Crossing, and as of late it feels like even people who love this genre of games have felt like the market has gotten too generic and saturated. But web fishing is a cozy game that feels so refreshing yet familiar, unique yet recognizable, and is overall a very fun experience. You just fish. That's it. There are upgrades for your rod, items that are both useful and cosmetic, and a small map to explore. But other than that, you just fish. You can invite friends or join random players' rooms to fish and chat. It's nothing crazy, but it is a very relaxing and charming experience. Plus, there are a lot of fish to find and many upgrades that help you catch better ones. There's not much else I can even say about this game because it's just that simple, but that simplicity is what makes the game so good. You won't get hundreds of hours and multiple playthroughs out of this game, but what you will get is a fun little fishing game to boot up after a rough day to unwind and chill. And for only $5, what more could you want? Pepper Grinder is one of my favorite indies that came out this year, and I saw almost no one talk about it. I don't understand why though, as it's such an amazing 2D platformer filled with unique gameplay mechanics and a ton of fun ideas. What makes Pepper Grinder unique is that you have a drill that you can use to traverse parts of the level and solve puzzles. This was the main draw for me, and the minute I saw this, I knew I had to get my hands on the game, and it does live up to those expectations. The drill is used in so many creative ways, as it isn't just for platforming, but can also double as a weapon. There's collectibles to find in every level that can be used to purchase secret stages, customization options for your character, and more. This game just has so much character behind it, but it isn't perfect. For one, it only took me about 4 hours to beat the main story, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just kinda caught me off guard. Pepper Grinder is a very condensed experience that you could beat in an afternoon, which I think is wonderful for its replayability. However, I do wish there was more to the game since the concept is so great. Another gripe I have with it is the physics. Pepper cannot jump to save her life. Most of the time, it doesn't matter since you'll be using the drill to do most vertical platforming, but when trying to get the gold medals in the time attack mode, it can be kinda frustrating. I feel similarly about the way she launches when you drill out of a platform. Where you'll end up feels very inconsistent since you're launched so fast that it's hard to know where you're going and you don't have much control over Pepper. This I found to be a lot more annoying though, as it led to a lot of deaths in my normal playthrough, and using this mechanic is integral to beating the final boss, which in turn took me a while to do. I think there's a lot to love about this game, but it does have some very minor problems. However, I do think Pepper Grinder deserves a lot more recognition and exposure than it's gotten, so I would highly recommend you give this game a look.
Where's Lino?
He's right behind me, isn't he?
Lethal Company took the world by storm in late 2023, and for good reason. This is one of the best games out there to play with friends. You can lock in to get as much money as possible, or just goof around and have fun. If you somehow haven't heard of this game, the main premise is that you go to one of several different planets in search of treasure to bring back for your ship and meet a quota. Each time you land on a planet, the treasures, enemies, and their placements are randomly generated, which makes each day unique. The proximity chat adds to the horror, as it's easy to get lost and lose all communication with your friends. You have no idea if they're even alive or if you're about to walk into something dangerous yourself. There's also a lot of items and upgrades to buy to help you collect as much as possible and keep the gameplay fresh. To be honest, I'm not that great at this game though, so I prefer to just goof around and help as much as I can. But since there's no overarching progression or gameplay loop to keep you playing run after run, I find myself getting bored of the game fairly quickly. However, when I'm having fun with it, I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's a game I found myself coming back to with friends every once in a while. Plus, there's so many mods for this game that I've barely even touched, so there's always something new to experience when I boot this game up. This game is a really fun time, and I would highly recommend it. Even for those who don't really like horror games, it's not really that much of a horror game. Paper. The Paper Mario series is one of the most controversial Nintendo franchises out there, but the first two are pretty much unanimously agreed to be the best. And after playing both of them this year, I agree. The first game on N64, aptly titled Paper Mario, does a great job of introducing this new RPG series. The partner system is great, the writing is charming and witty, and the bosses and different enemy types bring that classic Mario charm. The combat may be simple, but it's still a lot of fun. I just think the story and world of this game aren't nearly as interesting as some of its sequels. There are some creative things they do with the story, but it made some of the later chapters of this game kinda drag for me. But hey, I think the game is good enough for what it is, so I'm not gonna complain anymore. Paper Mario is one of my favorite N64 games, and it ages really well. Most games from this era don't look that good by modern standards, but I think Paper Mario aged great. It's also one of the few RPGs on the system, which makes the game stick out. If you like Mario RPGs, or just RPGs in general, definitely give this game a look.
All right, put him up. I just love my dog.
I've heard many people say that Sonic had a rough transition to 3D, or even that Sonic fundamentally cannot work well in 3D because of the nature of his fast-paced platforming. The Adventure series gets a lot of praise, but I've also heard a lot of people say it's all nostalgia and that neither of the games have aged well. So needless to say, going into Sonic Adventure 1 for the first time, I didn't know what to expect. However, I was pleasantly surprised by what the game had to offer, which makes me question why people don't like this game or why they say it was a rough transition from 2D to 3D. Sure, there's some jank here and there, the voice acting is questionable at best, and all the stories other than Sonic's don't have nearly as much to them as they could and arguably should, but you know what, that's what makes this game great. Honestly, the jank is not even that noticeable, and it doesn't detract from the gameplay much at all, and I'm somebody who has a really low tolerance for that kind of thing, so if it didn't bother me, it can't be that bad. The cutscenes and voice acting are extremely dated, but honestly, I think it adds to the charm of the game. The game is so cheesy, and I love it. And say what you will about the different stories, but 6 different campaigns with their own playable characters, plus a final story that has an awesome final boss, is extremely impressive for a 1999 platformer on the Dreamcast. Sure, I wish each story was longer and as fleshed out as Sonic's story is, but I have to commend them for what they were able to accomplish here. Each character feels completely different to play, and they all have different kinds of stages, making going back to old levels familiar, but fun. Plus, experiencing different parts of the story through the eyes of a different character and piecing together the full narrative is cool, but I do wish it was handled a bit better. There's also a ton of sub-games to master, you can go back to previous levels and do missions to get more emblems, and of course, this game was the introduction of the iconic Chow Garden. Though I didn't really end up doing much of that in my playthrough, unfortunately. This game is just fun and ambitious, which are things I can't really say about the modern Sonic games, at least not to the same extent. I mentioned that one of my biggest problems with Sonic Forces was how it was such a nothing game and they were too afraid to try anything new. Sonic Adventure has almost the opposite problem, where there might be too many ideas in the game, and trying to cram them into 10 to 15 hours of gameplay makes it so not everything gets the attention it deserves. However, I'd vastly prefer what this game does over Forces, which you can see by how much higher it is on the list. This was back when Sonic Team really experimented and put love and care into their games. It's not perfect, but I had way more fun with Sonic Adventure than I was expecting to. It's a must-play for any Sonic fan.
I'm Spider-Man.
Sonic Mania is one of my favorite platformers of all time. So when I saw that a group of the developers created their own indie studio and were making an original 3D platformer, I was ecstatic to try it out. And I think for the most part, Penny's Big Breakaway lived up to the hype. The movement in this game is awesome and super unique. You use a yo-yo to swing, spin, dash, and roll through levels at lightning speed. There are several collectibles found in each level, with many of them being rewards for keeping your speed. The soundtrack is incredible and the story is very charming. If you're a fan of 3D platformers, you are sure to love this game. Just like with Pepper Grinder, there are a few issues that hold this game back from being one of my favorites of this year. For one, the game has a fixed camera, which wouldn't be a problem if the game was completely designed around that. It isn't. There are multiple times where I found myself fighting against the camera in certain spots, and it kinda messed with my depth perception, which led to many deaths that came from me simply not knowing where I was gonna land. The movement also takes a little bit to get used to, but once you do understand it, you'll be doing skips and tricks without even trying. However, I didn't even try to do the time attacks or any crazy skips because I'm not an expert at the movement by any means, and I knew that trying to become an expert would just end in my frustration. There's also several glitches I encountered throughout my playthrough that were never anything too game-breaking, but they were noticeable. And this was a fair bit after the game came out, so I can only imagine what the game was like at launch. I was playing on PC too, and I've heard that the Switch version is even worse. Just beating the game casually was a lot of fun, and I didn't run run into too many issues, but I really can't see myself doing much more because of how frustrating I know it would be to try to 100%. But just like Pepper Grinder, I don't think nearly enough people talked about this game, so I would highly recommend any fan of the genre give this game a shot.
Jervis, get ready to clip this.
I'm not the most experienced with shooter games. I mean, judging by the fact that this is the only one on the list so far other than Splatoon, you could probably figure that out. But the genre has just never interested me as much as platformers or RPGs. A lot of that I think has to do with the state of modern AAA releases and the live service model, but it could also be because I don't try out as many of these games as I should. However, I found Marvel Rivals to be a great game that I could see myself continuing to play. It seems like every company these days is trying to pump out a soulless hero shooter to compete with Overwatch, which ultimately leads most of them to die as they fail to foster a fraction of the community that game has. So when I saw the announcement of Marvel Rivals, I just rolled my eyes and moved on, expecting it to be just another cash grab, but I was sorely mistaken. After looking into the game more and playing the beta and later on the full game, I realized this game had a lot of heart behind it. There's over 30 heroes to play that are all very fun and have varying playstyles and unique abilities. My personal favorites are Jeff the Landshark and Mantis, if you were wondering. They don't just take stuff from the movies either, as there are many characters in here I'd never even heard of before playing the game. Plus, a lot of the dialogue between characters can be charming and funny. It also doesn't get instantly boring like a lot of other live service games because they've already had a few events and new quests come out pretty frequently, so there's always something to do when you want to jump back in. The game is free to play and there are microtransactions, but hey, they aren't in your face or anything. It's clear that NetEase Games actually cares about this game and wants to see it and its community thrive. Is this game carried by the recognizable IP behind it? I mean, probably, but there is still a ton of effort put in here, and the game wouldn't be as popular as it is if it was just Marvel trying to make use of their IP. The full game is still pretty new, but there's a lot of people playing, and I can't wait to see what updates they add in the future.
I'll take a potato chip and eat it.
Wow, this is a lot higher on the list than I was expecting. Death Note Killer Within is like Among Us, but better in almost every possible way. When loading into a game, you're given one of 4 possible roles: L, Investigator, Kira, or Kira Follower. As L, your goal is to catch Kira and arrest them while holding the Death Note. You get extra abilities both during the day and during meetings, but you have to keep your identity a secret because if Kira kills you, they win the game. As Kira, you also have extra abilities you can use, as well as being able to kill people with the Death Note. However, to kill them, you must have their ID, which can only be obtained by standing close to someone for a few seconds. That's where Kira Follower comes in. They can steal IDs as well as pass them on to Kira, and Kira can pass on the Death Note to their follower if they're getting suspected. Everyone else in the game is an investigator who completes tasks and helps to figure out Kira's identity. There is even more I could explain about this game, but that's the main concept. It's pretty complex and kind of hard to learn at first, to be honest, but it's really fun once you get the hang of it. There's proximity chat, character customization, and so many cool references to the show. My only big issue with the game is that getting a lobby with decent players can either be really easy or really hard. Half of the people who join are extremely loud, are literal children, or are just screaming slurs, so, you know, that's fun. But if you can find a good lobby or gather a few friends to play the game, it's a really fun time. There's also a battle pass system and cosmetics to buy, but you have to spend additional money to unlock it all. Considering this game isn't free to play, that feels kinda cheap, to be honest. Like, I'm already spending $10 on the game, and you want me to pay double that just to buy the 2 battle passes? It really wouldn't annoy me this much if the free items you could unlock were nearly as appealing as the paid ones. They aren't. The game is still pretty fun though, so who really cares? Death Note Killer Within is an amazing time.
Konnichiwa?
Sonic Adventure 2 is a lot of things. I would say good is one of them. I would also say annoying is one of them. First, let's talk about the good. Adventure 2 is an improvement on the first game in a lot of ways. Instead of having 6 separate campaigns, SA2 has a hero story and a dark story, and each has its own set of playable characters. There's Sonic and Shadow, who have the high-speed action platforming playstyle most people come to the game for. Tails and Eggman play through mech stages where you beat up enemies and get to the end, kind kind of like Gamma's story in Adventure 1. And finally, the Emerald Shard missions return from SA1 with Knuckles and Rouge. I think having 3 different gameplay styles spread across 6 characters is a smart move. It makes it so each one of them gets enough time to shine, which is a problem I had with the first game that I'm glad they fixed. There's also no hub world, which is kinda disappointing, but I ultimately think it was for the best. I didn't mention this when I talked about SA1, but one of my biggest problems with that game was how a lot of your playtime would be spent just running around the hub worlds trying to figure out where to go. It felt bloated and unnecessary, even though I did like the concept. It cuts a lot of the fluff of the first game and makes it a lot more replayable. The 2 stories also work really well together. There aren't a lot of cutscenes you have to watch multiple times unlike the first game, and overall, I found the introduction of Shadow and his backstory to be more captivating than the history of the Echidna tribe and Chaos from Adventure 1. The cutscenes and character animations are vastly improved, though the voice acting is still a bit rough in some places. The music is also top-notch, of course. It's one of my favorite soundtracks in the series with so many iconic bangers. Just like Adventure 1, the game is just cool. I mean, City Escape is one of the most iconic levels in all of gaming for a reason. It's awesome. However, there are some big things that hold this game back for me. For one, the game can be extremely frustrating at times. Even just going through the main story, I found like half of the levels to be slightly annoying at best. Honestly, I think it's just because the game is too hard. You can say skill issue all you want, but there are several stages I found to be straight up just not fun because of their difficulty. I have some other minor nitpicks as well, such as the radar and the emerald hunt stages only being able to track 1 emerald at a time. This is just dumb because it wasn't like that in the first game. While I do like these stages overall because they are more designed around Knuckles and Rouge, this might be one of the worst cases of artificial difficulty I've ever seen. The Tails and Eggman stages just aren't very fun even when the level design isn't screwing me over. Also, there are just way too many of these mech stages, especially in the Dark Story. Like, seriously, why are there 5 mech stages and only 4 action stages? Sonic Team, what are you doing? The action stages are easily the highlight of the game, but only having 10 of them is kinda disappointing. But despite all of these problems, I still found myself loving the game. It's all about the experience. The characters, the music, the atmosphere, and yes, even the constant beeping in the mech levels. It all comes together to create one of the most memorable gaming experiences, and it is one of my favorite Sonic games. Is the game ranked higher than it probably should be? Oh, most definitely. But it's just because I love what this game does right so much that the flaws don't stick out as much as they may stick out for others. If you're a Sonic fan, you have to play this game.
Well, Cuphead and his pal Mugman, they like to roll the dice.
This is another one I was not expecting to be this high, but here we are. Super Mario Party Jamboree is my favorite Mario Party game that I've played, and is a true return to form for the series. Despite being a sequel to Super Mario Party, the game takes a lot more from Mario Party Superstars. The gameplay is the pure classic Mario Party that we've come to love, with modern features and some new ideas that are mostly fun. The boards are fun and creative, and having 5 new and 2 returning boards is great. Now, the 2 returning boards being from Mario Party 1 and 2, despite those being the most represented in Superstars, is a weird choice, but hey, I won't complain about having an actually good board count for once. The side modes are also pretty fun, even if most of them can be fully experienced after playing just once. This is the most content-filled Mario Party with a lot to sink your teeth into. The only complaints I have are about the amount of minigames and the Jamboree buddies. This game has the most minigames in the series, but a lot of them are either exclusive to the side modes or use motion controls. And if you're like the majority of people playing this game and mostly just play the main party mode with motion controls off, you'll be seeing the same few dozen minigames a lot. The minigames themselves are mostly good, but even too much of a good thing can be tiring. The Jamboree buddies are a fun idea at first, and they have mostly great minigames, but they are insanely broken. And despite this game having a pro rules option, there is no way to turn the Jamboree buddies off in any way, which is really stupid. But the core Mario Party gameplay being so good makes up for all the shortcomings this game has. I've had so much fun playing this game with friends over the last few months, and I would highly recommend it if you're into this kind of thing. I love PvE multiplayer games. Whether it be battling bosses or hordes of monsters, games where you team up with friends to fight a common enemy are extremely fun to me. I mean, Monster Hunter is one of my favorite video game series for a reason. So when I saw the popularity of Helldivers 2 early in the year, I knew I had to give it a shot. And I ended up starting this game in December. Yeah, it took me a while to actually get around to playing this one, which was mostly because I didn't have anyone to consistently play with for a while there, and I knew if this game was anything like the games I compared it to, it wouldn't be nearly as fun to play by yourself. I think that was ultimately for the best, because once I found a friend to play with, this game became a blast. Sure, I haven't sunk as many hours into this one as many others out there have, but the time I have spent on this game was enough for me to put it this high on the ranking. The main premise of Helldivers 2 is that you team up with friends to fight for democracy and wipe out bugs, robots, and other evil creatures that are disturbing the peace. Each mission has a set objective to complete, but there are also side missions and places to explore around the planets that can give you rewards to upgrade your gear, or give you currency to use in the cosmetic shop. There's a variety of weapons and gear upgrades you can obtain through playing that makes doing the harder missions more manageable. A lot of these are really cool, and I was always looking forward to the next upgrade. You can get credits in the game through spending real-life money, but everything can also be obtained by simply playing the game and finding credits by doing side objectives that I mentioned earlier. There's no limit on how many you can get per day or anything, so the more you play the game, the more you unlock. As I said before though, if you don't have anyone to play with, the game isn't nearly as fun. You can join random lobbies and just hope that your teammates are good or at least have a mic, but playing with a group or even just a single friend you already know goes a long way to improve the experience. I'm looking forward to playing even more of this game in 2025, and if you're a fan of multiplayer PvE games, you're sure to have a blast with Helldivers 2. Somehow, I never played this game until this year, which is weird because I've played every other classic Sonic game, including CD, but somehow this is the one that eluded me. And yeah, it's easily the best one, but I feel like that's kind of a technicality. The complete package that is Sonic 3 and Knuckles is easily the best Genesis Sonic game, but if we're judging them as two separate games, I think I still prefer Sonic 2. But since no one actually looks at this game that way, including Sega, neither will I. This game is incredible. Almost every zone is great, the elemental shields are some of the best power-ups in the series, the special stages are actually good for once, and the soundtrack slaps. Nowadays, this game is considered short, but this is double the content found in the other Genesis titles, which was crazy for the time. It's such a fulfilling experience for how short it is, and I can see myself coming back to it over and over again. This is one of my favorite Sonic games, and I'm upset I didn't play it sooner. Oh yeah, and the game has Knuckles in it, so need I say more?
I just got demons coming inside me.
If this year has taught me anything, it's that I love Atlas RPGs. I mean, not that I already didn't like them before, I mean, Persona 5 Royal is one of my favorite games of all time. But after playing multiple different RPG series made by Atlas this year, I'm convinced they can't mess up, if you don't count this one. And this one. But the fact that Atlas released 3 big RPGs this year that weren't video game slot machines, and the lowest one is this high on the list, should say something. SMT5 Vengeance is an amazing turn-based RPG for those who love difficult and complex combat. Almost like Pokemon, you can build a team of demons to help you fight and exploit enemy weaknesses. This game uses the press turn system, which gives you extra turns when you hit an enemy's weakness. This allows for many different strategies, which makes me prefer it over the one more system used in Persona that ultimately boils down to hitting weak spots over and over again to do all-out attacks. SMT5 in specific has large open areas to explore where you can find secrets and do side quests to grow stronger. And you're going to want that strength because this game is hard even on normal difficulty. Deaths were very common even on normal enemies, which could get frustrating at times when you hadn't saved in a while. The lack of autosave at any point in the game can be pretty annoying, to be honest. I don't want the game to be saving every 2 seconds because that would make deaths feel less meaningful, but at least doing one every few minutes or so would have been nice. Other than that, there isn't that much to critique about this game. This is one of the few games on the list I'm still working on, but I feel like I played through enough of it regardless to have a full opinion on it. This game is an incredible challenge for any fan of hard RPGs or just those wanting to try out new creative combat systems. However, if you're someone who goes to RPGs mainly for the story, you you may want to skip out on this one. Sure, this game does have a story, but it takes a back seat most of the time, and at least from the point I'm at in the game, I didn't find it to be super captivating. I am interested to see where it goes though, but if you're someone who wants a good story from an RPG, I would recommend playing one of Atlus's other titles, which include 2 games that are higher on the list.
Hey, reference.
Astrobot is a great game whose developers put a lot of love and effort into it. It's a fun 3D platformer with smart and creative level design, cool abilities, and it serves as a celebration of PlayStation history. The game is simple fun through and through, and it's very easy for anyone to pick up and play, but I don't think it's perfect or revolutionary. There is a lot of good in this game. As I already mentioned, there are so many creative levels and abilities to use throughout the game that keep the gameplay fresh. Several collectibles and little goodies are found in every level, making returning to previous stages feel rewarding and fun. The references to all of these gaming icons are done in a natural way that doesn't feel forced or out of place. It's fun to see all of these characters, and no matter what kind of gamer you are, there is going to be at least one thing you recognize here, which I can greatly appreciate. The hub world is great, the customization is great, the music is great, and there's a ton of fun levels to go through. This is a high-quality 3D platformer that I think any fan of the genre should try. It doesn't do anything completely new or revolutionary, and that isn't a bad thing. The game is just pure fun, but I feel like a lot of people are acting like this is a perfect platformer, and no one seems to be pointing out the same problems I have with the game. To be fair, I don't have a lot of issues with it, it's more that there is one big issue that holds this back from being higher on the list, and that is the movement. Many of my favorite platformers have the gameplay philosophy of being easy to learn, but hard to master, especially 3D platformers. You may just be running and jumping at the end of the day, but there's usually more complexity to the movement that allows skilled players to get through levels faster, find secrets, or do cool tricks. Games like Super Mario Odyssey, Celeste, and even ones I've talked about today like Sonic Adventure 2 and Penny's Big Breakaway all adopt this philosophy. It's what makes them so fun and replayable. However, with Astrobot, it feels like once you've learned the movement, you've also mastered it. There isn't much to it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just makes the game less memorable and replayable to me. Despite its quality, I don't see myself going back to this game as often as other platformers that I have ranked lower on the list. But the fact that Astrobot is ranked this highly regardless of that says a lot about how good it is.
We're doing a sequel.
Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is one of the best sequels in all of gaming. Not only does it stand out on its own and add a ton of things to an already interesting concept, but it improves on the first game in basically every way. My main criticism with the first game was that a lot of the environments and characters were kind of too generic Mario for my tastes, but in this game there are so many creative ideas that makes every chapter memorable. Sure, in the first chapter you're just going to a town full of generic Koopas, but at the end you fight a giant dragon. And this is just chapter 1, by the way. Rogueport is also an incredible place to start your journey, and it has so much character to it. You could describe the whole game as being like that, honestly. Having character is this game's thing, which has led me to understand why so many people dislike the newer games. The writing here is amazing, the combat is zany and fun, and the diverse cast of Mario creatures you'll encounter across your journey are insanely memorable. Sure, the first game also had these elements, but in this one it's cranked up to 11. While the combat is still pretty simple compared to a lot of other RPGs I've played, the game does a lot to keep it feeling fresh, and there are a lot of new mechanics added to make it more unique, which is something I can't exactly say about the first game. This is by far my favorite Mario RPG that I've played, and I finally understand why people love it so much. The remake, which is the version I played, also looks gorgeous. This is one of the best looking Switch games out there and is a vast improvement over the original's visuals. It may run at 30 FPS, which I understand bothered a lot of people, but I barely even noticed it most of the time. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is an amazing RPG that I would highly recommend for any fan of the genre or newcomers looking for a gateway into this facet of gaming. Before we get to the top 5, I'd like to take some time to discuss the honorable mentions of this ranking. These are games that I either wanted to play but didn't get to, or they were games I started but didn't feel like I played enough of to have a full opinion on them. Unicorn Overlord, Dragon's Dogma 2, Mario and Luigi Brothers Ship, Sonic X Shadow Generations, and Dragon Quest III HD 2D were all games I wanted to play but never got around to because most of these are long RPGs that would have taken a while to beat. I also started Elden Ring and Dark Souls 1 this year and enjoyed what I played, but I ended up putting the games down because I got busy with other stuff. I played Elden Ring a lot more, getting over 20 hours in, but because of how big this game is, I still don't think it was enough to talk about it. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and the Apollo Justice Ace Attorney trilogy are all sequels to games I haven't played, but I would like to. So because of that, I never got to these games, but I figured I'd mention them because they were pretty big releases this year. And finally, Monster Hunter World was a game I started earlier this year, but because I didn't have any friends to consistently play with a lot, I didn't get that far into it, and those are all my honorable mentions. You can expect to see some of these games on next year's list if I end up making that, but I probably won't have played all of them by then. But now, let's get into the top 5 games I played in 2024. Persona is one of my favorite game series out there, and Persona 3 in particular has my favorite story out of all of them. So when I saw that they were remaking this game with modern visuals, quality of life improvements, and new content, I was hyped. As more and more stuff started to come out about the game though, I found myself a bit disappointed in what it had to offer. Where was all the Fez and Portable content? Why did they change the voice actors? Why does the new version of Mass Destruction sound like how Wet Socks feel? But as we got closer and closer to the release date, these changes started to bother me a lot less, and I started looking more at the positives with this game. The only reason why Persona 3 isn't my favorite game in the series is because of the dated combat and visuals, but this is the main thing they're changing about this remake. I quickly got very excited for this to be my favorite Persona game. Unfortunately, I still think Persona 5 Royal beats it out, but it's still a great game. The visuals and aesthetic of this game are beautiful. I've heard a lot of people complain that Persona 3 Reload is just a Persona 5-ified version of the original, but I don't see how that's a bad thing. The new music really grew on me over time, and while I still prefer the originals over the remix tracks, the new songs they made, like Full Moon Full Life and Color Your Night, are amazing. The combat of this game also feels much more modern and was a joy to play. The only problem I have with the dungeon crawling aspect of the game is that I think Tartarus at its core is just not my favorite thing in the world, which is why I still prefer the gameplay of Persona 5. But the life sim elements of the game are better than ever. The social links now have full voice acting and the environments look gorgeous. And the new social link episodes you get with the male party members really help to flesh out their characters and add more to the overall story. Oh, and don't even get me started on the story. Saying this is one of the best narratives in all of fiction is an understatement somehow. This is a must-play for any RPG enthusiast out there. And while I might prefer this game over some of the entries above it, I think the games I ranked higher do a bit more to stand out. Plus, this is a remake, so I ultimately decided to put it at only number 5. Another Crab's Treasure is one of the few games on this list I've made an extended video on. It's one of my favorite videos I've made, so I would recommend watching it after this one if the game interests you. Another Crab's Treasure is a Souls-like with a nautical twist where you play as a hermit crab named Krill who faces the dangers of the sea. Another Crab's Treasure is a great introduction to the genre as it has a lot of difficulty and accessibility options for new players. This was the first Souls-like game I truly sunk my teeth into, and it has led me to try out several similar games. The shell mechanic brings a new twist, allowing for creative abilities that keep the gameplay fresh. The writing is funny and the story is surprisingly deep. It goes to some pretty dark and serious places for a funny crab game. The difficulty may be lower than most would like, and the shell mechanic can be easily taken advantage of, but to me, that doesn't matter. This game is great for what it is, and I would recommend everyone give this game a shot. Whether you're new to the genre or a Souls-like veteran, there's a lot to enjoy here. While I could say more about this game, honestly I'd say just go watch my extended video on it, cause it's like 45 minutes long. I hate to say that for a game so high on the list, but I really couldn't have said it better than I said in the past.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it. Aw, dang it.
In a world where there's so many new roguelikes releasing that it's hard to stand out, Balatro does that and more. Chances are you've probably heard of this game already, but if not, there are only 2 words you need to hear: poker roguelike. Such a simple concept is done in such a unique and complex way that it became one of the best games to release this year. You've got dozens of jokers that give you a variety of unique abilities, and you unlock more of them as you play. Planet cards upgrade how many chips you get from specific plays, tarot cards can change cards in your deck or provide other one-time bonuses, and that's only scratching the surface of what there is to discover here. I haven't gotten as addicted as many others have, but I played the game for like 10 hours and I've still only encountered less than half the jokers. Editor's note, I also have been playing the game a lot more since I wrote this section, and I'm low-key addicted now, so, you know, that's fun. I haven't even finished a run yet because I'm honestly kinda bad at the game, but that doesn't matter because the gameplay is so fun and satisfying. To be honest, I found it exciting to lose because then I got to try a new strategy on the next run and discover new stuff. I can totally see myself continuing to play this game in the future. It's fun to just open up, play a run or two, and then hop out. Honestly, there isn't much I can say about this game that hasn't already been said. This is the indie darling of 2024, and for good reason. I cannot recommend this game enough.
You saved me. Why?
Monkey.
Black Myth Wukong is so many people's game of the year, and I can totally see why. This game is awesome, and there is so much to love about it. If it wasn't for the game at number 1 probably being my new favorite game of all time, this would have been at the top. But what makes this game so good? Black Myth Wukong is similar to many Souls-like games out there, but it technically isn't one. The main differences are that you don't lose your resources when you die, you don't directly upgrade each of your stats, and the combat is a lot more fast-paced than most Souls-likes are. It's more about dodging and performing combos than waiting for openings and getting punished when you get too greedy. Instead of upgrading your stats to level up, you level up automatically and get sparks that you use to unlock upgrades and new abilities. You can reallocate these sparks at any time from a shrine, which is this game's equivalent of bonfires or sites of grace. In fact, you can change pretty much everything about your items and stats fairly easily, which encourages trying out new builds and strategies for different bosses. The bosses here are fun, difficult, and there are a lot of them. The game never gets boring as there's always a cinematic boss fight just around the corner. However, I found the difficulty of some of these bosses to be kind of inconsistent, which is a problem that many of these kinds of games run into. On one boss, I'll be struggling for what felt like dozens of attempts, and then the next one I'll be on my first try. There's a few other issues I have with this game too, like there being no map after Chapter 1. I spent most of Chapter 2 waiting for them to give me a map until I gave up and looked online to find that there just isn't a map at all. The game is pretty linear, but there are a lot of branching paths you can go down that makes it kinda easy to get lost. Also, for some reason, your consumable items stay consumed even after losing against a boss, which is just stupid. You can get more of these items by crafting them or buying them in the shops, but that's just way more tedious than just letting me keep them after I die. Finally, many people criticize this game for having a lot of invisible walls, but honestly, I don't see the issue here. I encountered them sometimes, but most of the time it was pretty obvious where I could and couldn't go. But to be honest, these problems don't matter all that much. The game was still very enjoyable the entire time I was playing. There was never a dull moment, and even tens of hours into the game, I was still discovering new mechanics and abilities that keep the game fresh. The mythological story they adapt here is also very cool, and this being the first Chinese-developed AAA game is incredible too. There's a lot more I could talk about with this game, like the character design and more combat mechanics like the spirits, but I think this section has been long enough already, so I'll leave it here for now. Black Myth Wukong is an amazing game, but there is one thing that overtakes it for the number 1 spot. I am not exaggerating when I say that Metaphor ReFantazio might be my new favorite game of all time. Call it recency bias all you want, but the game is as close to perfect as I think a video game can get. But where do I even start? For one, this is another Atlas game, which is the same company that makes Persona and SMT, which are some of my favorite video game series. Metaphor takes a lot of aspects from Persona with its social sim mechanics and calendar system, but it also stands on its own in many ways. The game is in a completely different setting, taking place in a rich fantasy world with some of the best world building I've ever seen. And I'm not usually a fan of fantasy aesthetics, but honestly, this game might have sold me on it. The plot revolves around the current king of Ukrainia being assassinated. With no heir to the throne, the country is in disarray, but behind the scenes, there is a secret. The prince is actually alive, and as his childhood best friend, it's your job to take down Lord Luis, a corrupt warrior aiming for the throne who took the lives of both the king and the prince. The main themes of the game surround what can be quickly summed up as fantasy racism. There's several tribes in the country of Uchronia, with many being treated as lesser, including yourself. The writers do a great job at fleshing out these different races and making the entire world feel lived in. You team up with several party members from the different tribes and work together to take back the throne. I won't say anything more about the story though, because you really should just experience it for yourself. It's incredible. There were several twists and turns even at the very beginning that keeps the story interesting the entire time. But it's not just the story that makes this game great. The combat here might be my favorite in any RPG I've ever played. Metaphor uses the press turn system from SMT, which I talked about earlier. Not only that, but there are elements of action RPGs here, as you can fight enemies in the overworld and dodge their attacks. The main appeal of the combat, however, is the archetype system. There are dozens of archetypes in the game that serve as different classes for your party members to use. These archetypes can be changed at any time outside of battle, and every character can use every archetype. You can also inherit skills from one archetype to another, which makes this game have some of the most customizable combat I've ever seen. If you get stuck on a hard fight, there's always a new strategy you can employ by changing up archetypes or movesets. This made it so the combat never got stale for me and was so much fun to mess with the entire time. You unlock new archetypes by ranking up your bonds with your followers, which are the social link equivalent of this game. There's also social stats and several free time events to do while not in a dungeon, and just like in Persona 5, ranking up your followers also gives you additional abilities inside and outside of battle. Many have simplified this game as just being Persona 5 in a fantasy setting, but it's so much more than that. Someday I'd love to make an extended review of this game, but considering how much I have to say about it, who knows when that'll be. For right now, all I'll say is that Metaphor ReFantazio stands as one of my favorite games of all time, if not my favorite of all time. Plus, there is a free prologue demo that lets you play through the first few hours of the game, and you can carry your save data over to the full game. So there is no reason to not check this one out. Metaphor ReFantazio is a masterpiece. And that's my list. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments, and what were your favorite and least favorite games that you played this year. 2025 is going to be a huge year for gaming, with so many great titles already confirmed and Nintendo launching a brand new console that we still know like nothing about. Personally, I'm looking forward to Monster Hunter Wilds and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond the most. However, despite all of these new games coming out, I still want to try to work on my gaming backlog in 2025. So, as sort of a New Year's resolution of sorts, I've put together a list of 20 games in my backlog that I want to try to beat in 2025. Now, do I think I'm gonna beat all of these games? Probably not, but if I can beat at least like 10 of them or something, I'll be happy. This list includes Doom 2016, Kingdom Hearts 1, Yakuza Like a Dragon, Final Fantasy VII, Fallout 4, Going Under, Okami HD, Portal 2, Tomb Raider 2013, Sonic Unleashed, Omori, GTA 5, Zelda the Wind Waker, Sonic X Shadow Generations, The Last of Us, Super Mario Galaxy 2, Hades, Zelda A Link Between Worlds, Hollow Knight, and Persona 5 Strikers. As I said, I don't expect to beat all of these because a lot of them are pretty long games, but these are a lot of the games that I've been really wanting to play recently. I think this video was a lot of fun to make, so I'll probably make another one for 2025 as well. I'm looking forward to what this year holds both for gaming and for the future of my channel because I have a lot of ideas. But first things first, I've got a Pikmin 4 review to finish. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.